fingerprint on it's not even a fingerprint. I think it's more of a palm print on the rear sliding glass door. The only reason that Amito Black made that appear is because it was actually a bloody palm print, which means it was part of the crime.
And you would be wrong yet again, Pav. That was not a bloody print. There was no blood found on the sliding door. It tested negative. That was not a bloody print. And this is your reminder that Amito Black binds to proteins, and that doesn't mean just proteins found in blood. It can also bind to proteins in urine, proteins in vomit, proteins in other bodily fluids, and animal proteins as well. So that print was not bloody, and it was not indicative of being from a perpetrator.
Okay, two things right there. The first one is she said that I was lying because the fingerprint on the rear sliding door tested negative for blood, and she cited this note. Of course, if you read this note closer, you'll see that the sliding door in the kitchen, inside handle of the door, the interior of slider, 1/3 of 2023, a very small red transfer. Very small red transfer. That means there was a very small red transfer on the inside of that door that they tested that did not test positive for blood. It doesn't say anything about they tested the fingerprint on the door, L5. So when I'm called a liar and they don't read this very small red transfer line, it's really not fair. And here's the first part, but then there's a second part to that. She went on to tell me that I was lying because Amito Black will make all kinds of things appear because she did a Google search. Well, maybe you should do more than a Google search before you call somebody a liar. Let's hear what other people have to say about it that actually have experience in the matter.
L5 is a print on the sliding door handle in the kitchen. Is this confirming, because it hit for Amito Black on L5 and L6, that those prints were in fact bloody?
Yes, if it's Amito Black, it should be blood.
So that print was not bloody.
Yes, if it's Amito Black, it should be blood. But in addition to being a death investigator for the last 18 years, I'm also certified as a bloodstain pattern analyst, and then I'm also certified as a crime scene analyst. So I have a couple of different hats. I also teach all over the United States, bloodstain pattern analysis, crime scene investigation.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you.
Listen to Pavarotti. Can I be your superhero?
Hello, welcome to The Revealing. I am your host, Pavarotti, and I'm here to discuss the Idaho 4 case. Hey, boy, Pav, you're so mean. You're so mean to everybody out there. Really. If people had even a fathomable clue about all the stuff that old Pav has taken now for almost 3 years on this case, from every hating guilter out there and every frat conspiracy person out there. I mean, I get it from both sides. So, and it's amazing when I get it. That's usually kind of things that I get is people not doing research and forming their own opinion and then calling me a liar because their opinion doesn't match my interpretation. And I'll let you decide based on the opening of this whose interpretation is more accurate. I don't know, 20-year guy that teaches classes and has worked 4,000 cases, or a soccer mom. I don't know. You decide. But as we continue to dive into these new unsealed court docs, of course, I'm going to focus on the ones that we've talked about here recently. And there's one that I did just the other day that just so happens to be discussed in these new released court docs. And that is how this crime is from multiple perpetrators, according to the defense experts, and how multiple weapons were used. And I'll be danged if not specifically how the size of the wounds don't match one knife in the crime. It looks like there's multiple weapons used in the crime, according to the defense experts. Considering we just went over this the other day with what it's almost like I knew in advance, isn't it? But I went over how, no effort was put into determining the knife that was used in this crime by the pathologist in the case, and elementary scenario they had as far as matching it up to the victims and to the wounds. And I was like, how is this even possible? How could a pathologist even go through and do this? So we're going to go in a little bit deeper on that in this one because it's discussed in these new unsealed court docs. But first, let me remind you of what I had to say about that pathologist. And you can find this in report number 210 of the MPD reports, and it's talking about Danny Vargas and her meeting with the Spokane County Medical Examiner. Now, this meeting did not take place until June 7th of 2023. Now, imagine this. They knew a kbar knife, or they suspected a kbar knife, the day of the crime was used to commit this atrocity. They went out of their way to go and purchase a look-alike kbar from Amazon. But they waited until June 7th, just a few days before BRYAN KOHBERGER was secretly indicted, to go to the medical examiner's office and ask him to determine if that knife was used to be able to commit the crime on all four individuals. You've got to be freaking kidding me. And what did they do? On June 27th, she met with somebody at the MPD evidence technician and had item number 733, which is that kbar knife that they purchased to have in stock, their look-alike knife. And they temporarily released it to me so I could bring it to the meeting with the doctor. And I locked item 733 in a temporary lockbox in the MPD detectives as our meeting was on the following day. She removed it from the lockbox and brought it with her to Spokane. On June 28th, at approximately 10:30 hours, myself, along with Billy Boy Thompson, Ashley the Jack Jennings, Jeffrey Bye Nye, and Ingrid Beatty met with the doctor at the Spokane County Medical Examiner's office. Now, that doctor had pre-selected several photos. He had pre-selected several photos from each victim to go over with us so she could describe the shape of a weapon which would have caused the injuries. I removed the kbar knife from the sealed package and showed it to the doctor. The doctor stated the shape and size of the kbar knife was consistent as being the weapon which could have caused the injuries on all four victims. What? What do you mean you stated the shape and size was consistent? She took it out of the package and showed it to you, and you said, yeah, that's consistent. You didn't measure it? You didn't measure it against the wounds? You looked at a knife and said it's consistent? The doctor described how some of the wounds had 2 points on either end, which means it went like this. There was sharp on this end and sharp on this end because the tops of all those knives I showed you were double-sided until about a third of the way down. And the square shape wounds that had a point at one end and a square shape at the other. So a short stab would have shown 2 points on each side. A deeper stab would have shown a flat side on the back, basically. The doctor explained how the kbar could have created these wounds depending on the depth of the injury. Depending on the depth of the injury, they could have created these wounds. Does this seem like that they actually tried to tie this knife to this crime? The doctor explained the tip of the knife, having sharp edges on either side, would show a wound with points on either end. The doctor described a deeper wound would show a point on one side and a square on the other end and how it matched the shape of the knife blade, having the single sharp edge on one side and a square edge on the other below the tip. The doctor pointed out some of the wounds had a mark that was consistent with the guard of the kbar, and some of the wounds did, and described how the wounds could look different depending on the skin stretching, the dynamics of the situation at the time, and the angular position the knife was in when it was inserted or removed, and how a victim was moving or not moving at the time. The doctor described some injuries depicted that the strength of the weapon itself and the force used would have been great. So he never talked about the depth of the wounds, never did a measurement with the depth of the wounds. All the three knives we're talking about were 6 and 7 inches long. Everything that he describes here would fit all three of those knives. So when I think about a trial and the arguments that would be made at trial, we already know the defense is going to claim multiple perpetrators due to forensic evidence that's very slap you in the face. And the prosecution is going to claim a one-off Ted Bundy and try to focus on evidence around that. Yet, when they get into an argument about multiple weapons used, specifically multiple knives, because I think it's a slam dunk on the blunt force, but when they get into multiple knives and they start going through the arguments against and for, and that's kind of what we see in these new unsealed court docs, is how the arguments were going to be framed. And we start to really break down truth in the matter, right? And based on what the state did as far as trying to discover the truth, which was almost nothing, and based on the evidence at hand and other evidence around this case, I cannot in any possible way see the state winning this argument, number one, but also the truth of the matter is what we're after. And before we get into those new docs, I want to focus on some things, because when the truth of the matter of the evidence in this case is all brought together, it kind of paints a picture. Now, we know that they were searching high and low for a 7-inch long blade, fixed blade USMC kbar knife. And all the records show that. They found a knife sheath that matched the knife, so, we can imagine that. But there's also evidence that they went to Walmart looking for possible knives being sold, and they don't sell that in the store, so the Buck 119 would be the logical knife they would look for at Walmart. And then we have heavy evidence that not only they were looking for a possible match to the Gordon 6-inch Bowie knife sold at Harbor Freight, which is the copycat of this one, but there's even evidence of them searching for this after the arrest of BRYAN KOHBERGER. So if they were very confident in this being the only weapon used, why would they be looking for receipts for purchases for this weapon after they arrested KOHBERGER? And when you look at the physical evidence around the crime scene, I will concede that it's likely both Maddie and Kaylee were attacked possibly with the kbar knife, because the sheath was found in Maddie's room, and there is a mixture of blood between Kaylee and Maddie found in the crime scene. We have marker number 24, which is on the wall between the first and second floor. That's 90% Kaylee, 10% Maddie. We have marker 26, which is the blood on the half wall, which is basically 90% Kaylee, 10% Maddie. We have marker number 27, which is cast off above the first and second floor staircase on the north wall, which is basically 90% Kaylee, 10% Maddie. And then we have marker number X, which is a swipe leaving the door, which in Maddie's room, which is 70% Kaylee, 30% Maddie. So I'll concede they were both attacked with the same weapon at some point. However, once we look at the rest of the physical evidence, there is no DNA evidence of Maddie or Kaylee's blood anywhere in the vicinity of Xana and Ethan. And there's no cross-contamination between Ethan or Xana in their room of their blood with DNA evidence of this. So while I will concede it's likely they were attacked with the same weapon, even though we know Kaylee was also attacked with a blunt force object, there's no evidence that weapon attacked Xana or Ethan, and there's no evidence that the weapon that attacked Xana attacked Ethan or vice versa. That's where we have an issue. And when we look at the facts and we focus in, I'm going to focus in specifically on the 7-inch kbar blade and the 6-inch Harbor Freight blade, because while they are similar in dimensions, they are different, obviously, with the depth of the blade. 7 inches and 6 inches is a significant difference. And when we look at the wounds on Xana, wounds to the scalp, face, and neck, 23, you would not be able to determine if a 6 or 7 inch long blade created these weapons because of the depth that would be involved in those strikes. They wouldn't be able to go in 6 or 7 inches in the scalp, face, or neck. They wouldn't be able to go into the upper extremities, meaning the arms and hands, 6 or 7 inches, so we can eliminate those wounds. The lower extremities, they would not be able to go in 6 or 7 inches. So we can eliminate those wounds as being able to use them as a possible match to the weapons. So on Xana, you simply have a possible 7 wounds to the chest, 4 to the abdomen, and 3 to the back that could even be measured against the length of those blades, 14 possible. And then Ethan, you've got even less. Because again, scalp, face, and neck, you wouldn't be able to determine the length of the blade. It's too shallow. Upper extremities, the arms, you wouldn't be able to determine it. The lower extremities, the legs, you wouldn't be able to determine it. So there's only one wound that was committed against Ethan that you could even possibly compare the length of the blades to. So that's only 15 wounds on these 2 victims that you have to do the work on to determine if the knife is consistent. That doesn't seem like a lot of wounds to examine for a pathologist. It's not like he's having to examine all 160 something wounds. He's just got to look at 15 to determine this. So the lack of effort to determine if it was the same weapon is absolutely ridiculous, in my opinion. Now, we know that an effort was put in by law enforcement to find this knife, but we also know that there was effort put in by law enforcement to locate somebody that purchased this one as well. And we know that from one of the MPD reports where it shows that several other receipts from other customers, which Detective Schweeke collected at Harbor Freight, these receipts do not appear related, but were collected. And you can see the date and time of these receipts that were purchased when they purchased them. But then when we go to the ISP report with Detective Schweeke, we find out a little bit more information. On January 3rd, 2023 is when he picked up these receipts. 4 days after they arrested BRYAN KOHBERGER, he picked up multiple receipts from Harbor Freight and in the city of Pullman. And BRYAN KOHBERGER made 3 purchases from this business on 2 days in November, buying a Jupiter power inverter and another power inverter, which we see right here. But he was also provided a copy of videos of KOHBERGER's purchases. And he turned the receipts and the video evidence over to the Task Force Digital team located at the MPD. So I can understand them getting KOHBERGER's purchases for these power inverters. But what about these 3 purchases that he picked up on January 3rd that were purchases for knives that were purchased at Harbor Freight? Provided receipts for sales of fixed blade knives at Harbor Freight that Harbor Freight sells, none purchased by KOHBERGER. So we know there was active investigation into another type of knife in this crime. Now, considering all of that, and the best way for a pathologist to match up a knife to a crime, we look at the difference between doing it during an autopsy phase and doing it through a post-autopsy phase using photographs like we've already discussed in this. And during the autopsy phase, the most accurate assessments happen at the table because the examiner can interact with the tissue. He can do wound approximation, probing and dissection, and internal measurements because they measure the damage to the internal organs like the liver or heart. Since the internal organs are less elastic than skin, these measurements are often more reliable for determining the actual width and thickness of a blade versus just the elasticity of the skin. And if you do it during the primary phase, during the autopsy, you can get this information. But if you wait and you use photographs post-autopsy, then you're stuck to using scale photography. During the autopsy, the examiner takes photos with an ABFO scale, an L-shaped ruler, next to the wound. Forensic experts then can use software to overlay the weapon's dimensions onto the scaled photograph. Photographs are 2D and can be distorted by camera angle, parallax error. They also cannot show the depth of the wound or how the skin felt or moved when manipulated. Did they even do this though? Scale photography? No, what they did was look at the knife and then look at the pictures with their eyeballs and say, yeah, it could be consistent. Give me a break. How are you going to go into court and argue this? It should have been done here, and at the very least, scale photography should have been done. Metallurgy assessment should have been done. but none of it was. So now we get this. So here's the new docs that were unsealed, and this is specifically going to focus on the anticipated rebuttal testimony of Dr. Veena Singh, the pathologist in the case. They go on to say that all victims would have died within minutes. Singh is unable to determine what each individual victim was experiencing at the time of this altercation, but in general, wounds such as this would be painful due to extensive involvement of tissue containing sensory nerve endings. But this statement of all victims would have died within minutes is an attempt to justify the roommates not calling 911 for 8 hours. Well, they would have died within minutes anyway. Yeah. So work on saving the roommates there. You put a lot of effort in saving the roommates for some reason. Singh will testify a kbar style knife is consistent. Not that it committed the crime, but it's consistent with the injuries sustained by the victims. In response to defense claims that not all of the sharp force injuries observed could have been inflicted by a kbar style knife. So, defense expert says that not all of the sharp force injuries observed could have been inflicted by a kbar style knife. So what the defense is saying is this, basically. This is actually huge because this is a rebuttal to a defense expert. And the defense expert says that not all the wounds could have been inflicted by the kbar. It's not consistent. They said it could not have. That means there were multiple knives used in this crime according to the defense expert, which means simply the knife wounds that were inflicted on the victims were not all inflicted by a kbar knife. That leaves it up to interpretation. I mean, for all we know, they could have been inflicted by just about any knife out there. Yeah. Now, Singh will testify the dimensions of the skin wounds can't be used to exclude a knife based on knife size. The dimensions of the skin wounds can't be used to exclude a knife based on knife size. This is because the skin contains elastic tissue which will stretch around a weapon and recoil or retract when the weapon is withdrawn. The elasticity of the skin often causes the skin wound to be smaller than the size of the weapon used. And internal measurements, because they measure the damage to the internal organs like the liver or heart. Since the internal organs are less elastic than skin, these measurements are often more reliable for determining the actual width and thickness of a blade versus just the elasticity of the skin. And if you do it during the primary phase, during the autopsy, you can get this information. Singh will testify regarding serrations and striations with regards to the wounds sustained by the victims. Singh will testify that the defense expert appears to be conflating serrations and striations. The fine striations described in association with certain wounds are not the same as indicators of a serrated blade. The striations seen in the first photo below can be caused by any blade, whether serrated or non-serrated, due to irregularities or imperfections on the blade edge. Whoa! Irregularities and imperfections on the blade edge. Except I think you're forgetting this. The sheath was new and unused, that it was purchased for this purpose. How are you going to claim imperfections and irregularities and damage to a blade that is brand new, sir? They're pathologists. A serrated blade leaves a more prominent, evenly spaced abrasion and can be seen in the second photo below, and we don't get to see that. Regarding the number of weapons used, Singh will testify that the blunt force injuries do not necessarily mean another weapon was used. Blunt force injuries can be inflicted by a body part, hand, elbow, knee, and also by causing someone to impact an object in the environment, wall, table, bed frame. Well, if you're talking about the blunt force injuries on Kaylee, if you're claiming she was assaulted in the other half of the bed with Maddie, then how are you going to say a table or bed frame could have been involved in that? You can conceivably say the wall was, but then how are you going to match up the marks they found with the stripes on Kaylee's face? That would kind of eliminate the wall, wouldn't it? But a table or bed frame was nowhere in the area, so you would have a big problem with that. And a hand, elbow, or knee, I think, is not going to account for the marks on her face either. So you were really going to go into trial with this argument? Seriously?
I'm finished with this guy.
Sometimes I got to even sit back and ask myself, hey, am I being biased in this thing? But I don't think I am. Not in any way. I mean, there's obviously multiple perpetrators. There's multiple weapons used. And the arguments that the state was going to try to present against multiple perpetrators and multiple weapons and everything else we see around this, I don't know how you could even compare the arguments. It's night and day once we put them together. Please like and subscribe to this channel. Post your comments, thoughts, criticisms. Till next time, Pavarotti's out.
Can I be your